What did your annoying neighbor do? We had a party for all the neighbors when we moved in. I like to barbecue, and my wife is vegetarian. So we have 2 barbecues. We invited everyone in the street. They declined because we are vegetarian. Not to worry, I said. So's my wife. We have 2 barbecues going. One for meat, and one for vegas. I could see them trying to find another reason. They look at the invite. Oh, the 6th. We're out of town then. Sorry, that's cool. They don't want to come for whatever reason. They are not just going to say that. We are British. After all, the day of the party comes. Our garden is quite big, so everyone can fit in happily. We've got the barbecues going on the opposite side of the garden to the aforementioned neighbor's house. It's only about 4 hours into the party at around 5 PM that we notice the upstairs windows in their house are open. Weird. I thought they were out of town. As I'm looking at the windows with some of the other neighbors, we see the wife with a camera, taking photos of us. We go round and ring the bell to explain this is the party they were invited to, and they are still welcome to join. No answer. Curtains twitching upstairs. We go back to the party and just ignore them. Later into the evening, the parents and kids have gone home. Just a mix of older and younger neighbors left, and I'm now mixing cocktails at the outside bar. Honestly, this house was amazing. I have no idea how it was in our budget. But anyway, and then the police walking through the open back gate. Someone has lodged a complaint. It's only about 9 PM. Noise complaints in the UK are typically not followed up until it goes past 11 PM. But not only are we having the biggest party known to man, but we are setting things on fire and forcing alcohol onto children. Of course the police can see we are having a fairly civilized adult get together and congratulate us on moving to the area and for getting to know our neighbors in such a friendly way. Monday, we are off to unpack. Knock on the door. The police now have photographs of the alleged forcing alcohol on a minor and setting fire to things. It's one of the neighborhood kids bringing 2 drinks from the fridge to me and his dad at the barbecue. They are not even open. The setting fire to things? Yeah. Using a blowtorch to light my barbecue. Apparently that's endangering their property, which is a good 100 yards away from the contained fire within my oil drum barbecue. The police can see this is bullcrap. They just need me to make a statement explaining. So I do. For the whole 2 years that we lived there, they avoided us. So weird. So unnecessary. Picked a fight with our 70-year-old Indian neighbor. Like, an actual physical fight. Frickstick is in his 30s. Indian neighbor has seen way too much bullcrap in his life to tolerate anymore and hit him with a nectarine tree in a pot. When I was a teenager and lived with my parents, we had this one neighbor family that seemed sorta off. One day the father knocks on our door and tells my parents they haven't had power for a long time and begged to run an extension cord to one of our outside outlets for the day so his young kids could have cold milk with their cereal in the morning. My parents agreed to do this for one day. The neighbor kept up their part and disconnected the cable after that day. A week later they hook it back up again without us noticing. A month goes by and our electricity bill is basically double what it normally is. Parents head to the backyard and find the cable plugged in, yank it out, and confront the neighbor. At first the father doesn't show his whole body and cracks the door, but my stepdad gets him to open up the door after pointing out that he is concealing a gun. He didn't have to pull the gun out. Stepdad demands an explanation as to why the cable was run to our outlet, and the dude just sorta mumbles incoherently and shuts the door, locking it. Bad neighbor family was in a duplex and their neighbor, sharing the building, comes around and asks what's up. Parents explain the whole story and how the next step was calling the police. Good neighbor is a former police chief and is friends with the entire force. He offers to make the call. Several cop cars arrive. Bad neighbor father and mother are arrested. Turns out they were running a meth lab inside the house. The mother was a prostitute and the kids, a boy and girl between ages 7-10, were malnourished. The kids were put into foster care. No other bad neighbor has beat that high score yet. He used to stand on the footpath wasted every afternoon and yell to my husband about what a bitch I was. Once my husband told him to go home, and he shaped up to try and punch my husband, who was around 50 years younger than the neighbor. My infraction? He rang one day to check why my husband's car was home on a workday. I politely thanked him for his call and let him know my husband was sleeping and had a cold. Nothing to worry about. Apparently I was meant to praise him profusely for being such a caring neighbor, and my husband was meant to follow up with a call once he was awake, and also lavish him with praise for caring. Because we didn't. We got to hear about it loudly every afternoon, until we moved several months later. Called the cops on our then 6-year-old son, because he was playing outdoors in public property. It wasn't a road or anything. There was no danger whatsoever. He wasn't screaming or anything. She just didn't like kids. She also told our 3-year-old daughter that she was ugly. Late last year mine said he'll bash me because I got his driveway wet while I had a sprinkler going to water my yard. Not even joking, he flipped his crap over his driveway getting water on it. He's a drug addict, so yeah. Yelled at me for entering a shared garage to get some of our stuff. He later claimed I was after his gun, which was stored in a gun locker with a lock that only he had a key for. He was in his 60s or 70s at the time. He died last year, though. Jerry, when I moved in, he seemed eccentric, but harmless. Apparently my landlord had a conversation with him and told him to leave me alone. This upset Jerry greatly. He cornered me one day while I was unlocking my door and asked me to come sit with him in his apartment. I don't think the place had ever been cleaned, and he had hoarder mentalities. He drank a bottle of wine in about 30 minutes, commenting on all the sad things in his life. Luckily he passed out, so I could leave. A couple weeks later, he got into a 3 AM fight with his boyfriend, which resulted in his boyfriend trying to get into my apartment for safety, and eventually breaking into an empty unit down the hall. Cops were called, and Jerry was taken to jail. About a week after that, same boyfriend was over, and a fight ensued. This time it ended in very loud sex. Jerry would flush things you're not supposed to flush down the toilet, and would back up sewage into mine and my neighbor's bathtubs and bathroom sinks. Eventually he clogged his toilet so badly that he just ripped it from the wall and left it there. The cops came twice to my door to ask if I had seen Jerry lately, and asked to search my apartment to make sure I wasn't hiding him. One day while I was getting ready for work, he came into my apartment with another guy and tried to measure my walls for the renovation he was going to do to combine his and my apartments into one unit. But don't worry, I could just live with him when it was all finished. Eventually, Jerry got evicted, but would still convince people to let him into the building. For months his mugshot was pasted on all entrances saying to not let him in. He had to access roads to his property. He didn't live there. He just had livestock there and insisted on using the one that cut through our property, despite the fact that it was the longer route and it was a literal unpaved road through the woods. He didn't have an easement or anything. Just assumed that, since he had to drive through our property to get to that crappy lane road, he was allowed to do so. He was a total peen to us for no reason. Never said hi. Got upset if we were too close to his property despite the fact that he literally drove through our property every day. Revenge came when lightning struck a tree in the woods and it fell right across the access to the lane road on our property. He hired a service to chop the tree up and told them they could have the wood as part of the payment. It was nice walnut. My dad wasn't having any of that. He walked down there with a copy of the sale documents, pointed out the marker that clearly separated our land from our asshole neighbor's land, got the neighbor to admit that the tree in question was both from our land and currently laying on our land, not his. And then my dad sent the crew packing and told them if they took so much as a branch from that tree, it was theft and he, a lawyer, would see them in court for it. It's been over 15 years and that tree is still laying across the access to the lane road. He can still access his property via the other road, so he didn't have a leg to stand on to force an easement. Frick you, Jim. Got his cop buddies to come put stickers on our cars claiming they were illegally parked, so we had to move them so he would have room for his guests to park. I bought a corner lot in a newer subdivision, so I have curb and sidewalk on two sides of my property. The side of my house has plenty of room for parking which I sometimes use. My stepson uses And sometimes the other neighbors I like use. New neighbor bought a house on the other side of the street from my side and doesn't have a lot of street parking for his lot. He claims that the parking on my side of the road is his because it is across the street from his house. When confronted about the fact that it is just parking and no way belongs to him, me or anybody, he told us he knows people in the police department that can take care of this. He also picked this time to scream pretty specific mean things about all his new neighbors and how each one was crappy, like he is watching us. Neglected their daughter to the point that she'd sneak into our house and steal food from our kitchen. CPS was called. Rang my doorbell at 4 AM over and over and asked me to go with him because there was an emergency and it was important. Went with him and he took me over to his car and started asking what I thought of it and looked very proud. In other words, this dude rang every apartment in the building at 4 AM to get people to look at his new car. Frick these people. I hate them. Busted by SWAT last summer. I had to call into work because of the barricades. No arrests. And never got the story on that. While we live in houses, we do not have fences around the backyard. They got a dog. They used to sit on the porch while the dog roamed the neighborhood. Then they'd just let him out to roam the neighborhood while in their house. In the winter, they'd put on a coat and leave him out for hours. Then they'll stand on their porch screaming Pete, Pete, forever at 11 PM. Pete has disappeared. I think someone else in the neighborhood took him in. Now they have another puppy named Zero. He's probably 12-ish weeks and, of course, wandering the neighborhood. We can hear them beating the hell out of each other. So can people across the street. Police are out at least once a week arresting one of them. They bail each other out. Borrowed jumper cables. Never returned them. Came over last week asking for jumper cables. My boyfriend told them that we already loaned them to him and they weren't returned. Neighbors told us they were going to sue us for accusing them of thievery. I have more, much more. I moved onto a dirt road with several houses on it. My friend has lived down the road his whole life. The people next to my house only come up for the summer and are never there in the winter. When summer comes, however, there's multiple potholes on the road. Curious. I asked my friend. He said the neighbors come up in the summer and dig the holes themselves in order to slow down traffic. So, that screamed obscenities through the wall at my children because they were talking too loudly in the middle of the day. Screamed at us through the walls in the middle of the night so we could see how it felt to be disturbed. Regularly dumped his old food out of his bathroom window into our shared backyard. Rodent infestation took place shortly thereafter. Stopped paying rent to our landlord because he felt that the landlord should have warned him that he might be able to hear his neighbors. Dumped his trash on our shared front porch. Landlord did not renew his lease. Took him to court. Got his unpaid rent money back plus additional payment for damages to the apartment. It was a glorious vindication. On a near daily basis, he throws temper tantrums, yelling, stomping, throwing tools, slamming doors and screaming at his family over some petty nonsense. He's a crappy person. I feel bad for his family and I'm genuinely annoyed each time I hear his voice. Ripped up and threw away my mum's sweet pea plant that she got from her friend who died of cancer. When she complained, he started ranting about how our garden is a disgrace and an embarrassment to the neighborhood and we need to replace all the grass and plants with concrete. Prick. I just moved into my new apartment in Chicago and was woken up at 3 AM to some loud knocking on my door. Given it's Chicago, I thought the worst and assumed someone with a loaded gun was on the other side of that door. A moment passes and I sit silently in my bed running through self-defense scenarios in my head. I then hear a woman yell something through my door that had me on tilt. This lady says, "This is your neighbor. I was just wondering if you'd like to buy some Girl Scout cookies." Naturally, I ignored her offer and proceeded to go back to sleep angry and confused. Either my neighbor was high AF or trying to rob me. He would blast crappy EDM music almost every day starting from 9 AM, especially on the weekends. And once I asked him to please keep it down until 10 AM, he changed his habit to 8:30 AM. I'm pretty sure Sundays are for my upstairs neighbors to suplex their children and push over bookcases. My neighbor would chant "peen sucking bish" over and over and over every time I would do basic things like close the door or take a shower, hard enough for me to hear through the wall of my apartment. I was far from being loud. That guy just has so many issues. I got sick of it and called over the landlord. The landlord tried closing one door and the creep started chanting. My landlord went over right then and threatened to kick him out if he didn't stop. Luckily it worked. I don't live there anymore, but still remember it vividly. Partied too hard. As I got home from work one evening, I saw the neighbor chuck a drink bottle at one cop then throw a punch at another. Things did not go well for him after that. I found out after the fact that someone had called a noise complaint cause it was something like 11 PM on a weekday. This neighbor was a double asshole though. He had moved off campus with a pair of guys from his frat. The other two guys were cool. We had him over for grilling and vice versa. The guy who got arrested not only fricked himself, but caused so many issues that the other two guys who were on the lease got blacklisted by pretty much every place in town too. Had the city come around our own backyard with a clipboard and write us a $100 citation for each pile of dog poop they found too. He was really nosy, and for some reason he hated me. I was a 14-year-old girl and I don't remember doing anything to this man, but he would always rat me out to my parents if he saw me outside. He told them I was smoking, having sex in the tree in the front lawn, selling drugs, hurting animals. He just made things up. If I were in my backyard he would watch me through our privacy fence. Once I was out back drinking a root drink, one of those in a glass bottle. He popped up from behind the fence with this huge smirk on his face and said "Caught you," and tattled on me. My dad brought him out back and showed him it was a root drink and then explained to him if he ever caught him looking through our fence he would call the police. Years later we caught him in our backyard picking up pecans. Thought he would help himself to the wagon he had back there because it had been sitting a while and so clearly we didn't need it. The man was a total nutjob. He ended up moving away and we never saw him around again. Frick you Jerry from next door and whatever weird ass problem you have. His dog went through our trash and got sick. Dog ended up needing to go to the vet and told me when he bumped into me at my old job. Yeah, it was like $5 to get her back to health. You're lucky I don't bill you guys, mind you. This guy let his dog go through every own's yard and crap wherever it wanted. It's not like the dog escaped. He just willingly didn't care. Last time I saw him the cops were in his driveway with an apparent domestic incident. They use our trash bin and ram it full of bags of their gross nappies. I so badly want to take the bags out and leave them on their doorstep. The neighbor I used to have across the street from me once bitched me out for having a car parked partially on the grass of my own lawn. The streets were narrow and you're technically not supposed to park in them. The car was parked so that the tires on the passenger side of the car were both on the grass by about a foot, but it was at least helping to not block the street. This was only temporary. When she started bitching at me from her house, I thought it was because she didn't like seeing the car in the street. I could have at least understood that, but no. She was furious, and I do mean furious, simply because the tires on my grass were going to ruin my lawn. And my ruined lawn meant that it was going to lower her property value. She was trying to sell her home. She argued that parking on my grass was illegal, that her husband was an attorney, and that she was going to be calling the police. I told her to call, and I told her bitch of a husband to come talk to me. Neither happened. Ran over my dog with his car. It was an accident, but he didn't apologize. He takes sadistic pleasure in placing his yard sprinkler close to the property line so that it soaks our cars in the driveway. Not only that, but he waits until we've washed and dried the cars before he turns his sprinkler on. I have a history of apartment renting, so I've had a few interesting folks, two groups in particular. In my current apartment, my neighbors fight every morning. Every single morning without fail. They share a wall with my brother, and every day he says he hears "you never listen to me," nagging for a few minutes. Then something along the lines of "if you'd shut the frick up once in a while maybe it would be worth it." We only have a week left before we move out, and haven't heard a thump or whack yet. So we really can't call the cops. They just yell at each other. Now, my previous apartment was a different matter. A cop used to live next door, and he was an alright guy. He was very quiet, just nodded to me every morning as he headed off to work. But the people who moved in after he left, not so much. I lived next to them for roughly 10 months, and I did not see them come or go once the entire time we were neighbors. I recognized a smell from way back home one night while my wife and I were laying in bed, which shared the wall with them. We both recognized it immediately. The neighbors were smoking meth. This was not a one-time deal, and I'm fairly certain we heard the guy smack the girl around once. Then they were laughing and dancing less than 5 minutes later. They sometimes communicated through barking at each other. Once again, the thought to call the cops was there, but we both knew from our upbringing how notoriously unpredictable tweakers are, and further that we were obviously the only people who would know what was going on, since it was just our 2 apartments in that small building. Since we couldn't do anything serious about it, we just started having obnoxiously loud sex. I'm not 100% this is related, but shortly afterwards my wife heard people trying to open the door to our apartment while I was at work. It didn't happen every day, but it definitely did happen 2-3 times a week for quite a while. The apartments were going to keep an eye out, but nothing was ever done. So yeah, we budgied out of there at the first chance. Just recently, my new scumbag neighbors have decided to throw dirty diapers in my driveway. We know it's them. They have the only diaper wearing child on the block. My wife tossed them back into their driveway. 2 hours later the same diapers reappeared in my driveway, followed by a third that was only a few feet from my door. I told my wife to leave them to me for when I got home from work. Upon arriving home, I tossed all 3 diapers onto their roof, likely never to be seen again until the humid Midwest summer bakes those freaking diapers into a glorious, colonic blasting crap storm of a smell for the douchy neighbors. Yelled at me cause my cat was sitting in my tree in my yard and making his dog bark. Literally ranted and raved for nearly 5 minutes. Threw a firecracker on my couch and lit it on fire. Accused my kid of being a bully. Apparently the fact that my kid has friends other than her kid makes them awful. / if you hadn't gotten yourself into a situation where you're no longer on speaking terms with over half the mothers in the neighborhood due to your wild accusations and angry outbursts at 8-year-old kids when you think their parents can't see you, your daughter might have more friends. I will point out that the daughter is a lovely kid and doesn't deserve this. I remember having an older neighbor kid ask the rest of us younger kids to collect snails so he can have a snail pet farm. Me and 3 others collected them and gave them to him in a cardboard box. Then he said, "Watch this." He then showed us a can of hairspray and a lighter and torched the snails to death. I didn't talk to that kid after that. He tore down part of my freaking fence under the guise of fixing 2 posts, but hasn't gotten around to actually fixing it for almost 2 months. The last conversation was me asking him to get estimates to have a fence company come in for the repair and him agreeing. 2 months. Frick him. Was living with my brother and a new family moved in downstairs. It was a mother and 2 boys in their teens, and the mom had just been divorced, and from what we could tell it was a bummer time. So these 2 teenage boys fought constantly. They were incredibly loud, and I tried really hard to be empathetic and not complain. We would mention to their mom every now and then and she was very apologetic, but it kept going. So one Sunday they woke us up at 6 AM, slamming doors and throwing crap and just being ridiculous. My brother and I set up every piece of audio equipment we had in the house. So a bass amp, 2 PAs, and a full drum set. And we blasted Hypnotized by Biggie for about 10 minutes and played along on bass and drums. PAs on full. Never heard those kids make noise again. Not sure if we shocked them or they finally got it or what, but we did prove who could make more noise, I guess. Then my brother fricked their mom. What was the question? We had just moved to our new house in the summer and it had a fenced-in pool in the backyard, which also had a fence around it. So, my siblings and I took advantage of it being a hot summer day and were out playing in the pool. I'm the oldest, so I'm just keeping an eye out and everything. And then I look over outside of the pool fence and I see our neighbor walking around in our yard to the fire pit that we had a further back in the backyard. I became a little uneasy cause I had only seen this guy once when we first moved in, and it looked like the fence that was between his property and ours had a gate on it. He smiled and waved to us, and I was like nope, and told my siblings to get out of the pool and inside. I told my mom straight away, and she was livid. That week, my dad and mom put a lock on our side of that gate so our neighbor couldn't get into our backyard. He noticed a bit later that he couldn't get into our backyard and was upset for some reason. Apparently the previous owners and him were like best friends and he used their backyard all the time to come and burn branches and leaves in their fire pit. Okay, good for them. But this was our house now, and you don't go walking into people's property without asking them first. Especially since we didn't know him at all. So while, God forbid, he may not had malicious intentions, it was still really creepy and kind of WTF when he got upset that we put a lock on our side of the fence to keep him off of our property. We don't talk to him much after that. My family was on vacation, and the person that was supposed to be caring for my dog left him outside in the rain. My neighbors called the police on my dog for barking at 9 PM at night. We talked with them on the phone and politely asked them to just call our cell next time. Next day, they did it again. My dog has had more encounters with the law enforcement than me. Has called the police on us for our pool not being clean and running by the beginning of May. Children's hockey sticks and wiffle ball bats on our front lawn. Our fence not being of the best quality. Our pool gate being too short and has a demon spawn grandson living with him that pulls up my flowers on a regular basis. He has called because we had a storage container in our driveway. He has also called because of a vehicle being parked in our laneway for 2. Meanwhile the friker's got a car that's been parked at the end of his driveway for longer than I have been living there. She just screams and goes on these long rants while screaming, then slams doors while continuing to rant and scream. Happens any hour of the day and can last between 5 minutes to an hour continuing on and off throughout the day. We can hear her with all the doors closed despite our house being double brick. We've tried talking to her which has led to nowhere. The police can't do anything as it's not consistent, nor can the local government as it's anti-social behavior, so the police have to deal with it. We can't get in contact with the home we wanna sell out. Next bet is to figure out which real estate agent is managing the property and put through a formal complaint, which sounds like a lot of work and might not even fix anything. Open to all suggestions on how to deal with her. Dude would practice his skateboard hours in his freaking living room. I lived next door and would hear this constant thunk sound. Never mind that we lived 2 blocks from a nice park that had tons of space he could practice in. No, that would require him to make an effort. I and the neighbor on the other side told him multiple times to stop, and it took getting the property manager involved to make him stop. A few months later, he got evicted for failure to pay rent. Can't say I was sad to see him go. Called the cops because of my dog. I lived in a house where the house next door was empty for over a year. So my dogs were used to having that extra yard space to play. Then a family moved in. So I didn't let them go over there anymore. One day my little dog got outside before I had the leash on him and he ran into their yard for a total of maybe 10 seconds before I got him back. Noon was outside besides us. 2 hours later the sheriff is at my point door saying the neighbors called him because a dog was in their yard and their kids are afraid of dogs. Okay, so you cold just came over to my door and explained your kids are afraid, and I would explained that I'll do my best to make sure it never happens again and how it was an accident in the first place. Even the sheriff thought it was ridiculous. We live in a small town. No need to call the cops when we cold just had a conversation between the two of us.